accessible, and that this accessibility is a societal and a political question, that transport system is a public good and which should be accessible for all age groups, for all social groups, and so the question of user-friendliness is, I think, a very important question. Another thing which I want to highlight is that we seemingly have have new means to do social networking. We talked this morning in one session about social networks who can help cycling initiatives, and I think that these new information and communication technology-driven networks, that they also change our travel behavior. So they change how we think about information. We need very quick, instant information. For example, I see on Facebook if my friend is perhaps in a certain cafe, but that also affects my transport needs. So I decide, okay, I also go to this place. And so we see an interconnection there, and we also see a linkage between what we can use as apps on our smartphones to get travel information, to combine public transport, for example, with the bike. I can see, oh, here are all my bike sharing bikes, where can I go to get the closest ones, and all this influences the travel behavior. And then, last but not least, there is also a change probably in the younger urban generation, which is can be said by decreasing car accessibility, and it's a highly discussed topic because it's not visible yet in all countries. There are studies of Western industrialized countries where this is really already measurable, that the car accessibility in terms of acquiring a driver license, but also having a car in the household, is decreasing in this group. And the reasons are very manifold. They are certainly also economically induced, but they are also lifestyle induced, that people decide on purpose, I don't want to have a car, the public transport and the rest what I can use, this is enough and fulfills all my needs. So just behind this background, I thought, okay, so we have changes, we have challenges, and we have big tasks, which is basically that we need a more sustainable transport system. And this is a global question for sure, but it asks for some kind of turnaround, and many things have to be transformed in a way. So, and when I go to the urban level now, so this is basically the focus I want to take. We have mobility needs, and these needs are embedded in our culture, and this is a political culture, this is societies, and this is a transport system. And so we have the feeling that something should change, and we have different, can take different perspectives how that should change. We discussed that during the last 2 days. And one approach which could describe it quite well, what the task is to see transport not only as a political and technical framework, but to see it as in a bigger frame, and we call that bigger frame mobility culture. And perhaps some people who worked with me in the workshop in the morning might think I'm repeating myself, but I want to do it in the plenary now. So what is meant with mobility culture? So if you think about transport in a wider frame, it's the understanding that there is not only infrastructure, there is not only the material part of transport and traffic, there's also a symbolic part in it. Just a small example is here this tram station in Alicante in Spain. It is just, I always use this picture because it symbolizes for me exactly what I mean with symbolic meaning of transport infrastructure. So it's just a tram stop, but for the user in this area, it is quite a very impressive tram spot, I would say. And so we have to understand that infrastructure, but also, for example, transport plans or urban development plans have also this symbolic meaning in it. For example, that perhaps minority groups are not focused, that perhaps somebody who is very small cannot reach the button at the ticket machine for the public transport, and so on. So everything has not only the material side or a rational understanding of it, it has also the symbolic side. And this is comprised in this concept of mobility culture. So we see also this mobility culture not as something, okay, there is a good culture. There are existing different cultures. There's not one good or bad one. There's also not something where you can say this is the goal, but taking into account the developments we want to take in direction, sustainability, you can say, okay, we want to reach a more sustainable mobility culture. And this, thank you. And therein you can also see that, or understand it in a way that there are different ways to reach that. So a sustainable mobility culture in Ljubljana might be in the end different than a sustainable mobility culture in Zurich or in Berlin or wherever. So there is not the non-plus-ultra solution, but it is a process, and it asks for a very integrated view on transport and mobility, and it asks on that the involved stakeholders really look together on it. And so it's also clear that you cannot steer culture. You cannot say, okay, we want now to steer the culture, but you can influence it. You can shape it, but it is a long-term process, and I think that's the difficult thing for us to understand it. Yeah, we all have very urgent goals, but we need patience in a sense. So we conducted a comparative study some years ago investigating mobility cultures in different cities in Germany, in Switzerland, in Austria, and in northern Italy. And yeah, we kind of found some key factors what these cities took into account or established, because they are some, if you see it on a line, so they are not the perfect sustainable mobility culture city, but there are some more in this direction than in being not sustainable. And so we looked at what did they do right to achieve that. And what you see here is basically some key factors, and I will not talk about all of them. I just want to highlight 3 of them because they have a very, I think, strong connection to cycling. And this is where I finally come to cycling, but I had, my goal was to put the cycling into a wider frame. So the first, the second one, basic consensus. What does this mean? It means that in the city administration and in the political arena of these cities, it was clear they had a long discussion, they had long disputes in different lobby groups and different stakeholder groups, but finally they found a consensus in which direction they want to develop their city, and it was a consensus which was overarching political wings. And that is the important thing, that it was not the case for one legislation period that there was this consensus. It was maintained over several legislation periods. The second point, strategic decision, the third point actually, strategic decisions also is somehow connected with it. It meant in some cases that these cities took very early, perhaps after reaching a basic consensus about in which direction they want to develop. They had a project, kind of, where they decided, okay, this is where we perhaps decide to do it different. For example, in Zurich, it was that they decided we don't want to build an underground railway system. We keep the tramway as our public transport backbone, and we renew it and we develop it. So just not putting a lot of money for building an underground, but to do something which is, in their view, better. And that was also a very important aspect. And the last one which I want to highlight is continuity and refinement. It has a strong relation to cycling traffic because there a lot of detail planning in the actual infrastructure is important, and there you see if everybody in the administration and construction understood what this task is. So I will just show two small examples connected to cycling, what about this basic consensus and strategic decision thingy. So this is a cycling bridge in Bolzano. And it is kind of the starting point of the cycle city in Bolzano. So as many of you know, today Bolzano is known as being very successful in promoting cycling with professional marketing. They started in the 1980s with a consensus that they want to build a cycling network, and that they start with on an abandoned railway with the first cycle track. So that was the basic consensus, and then all political parties worked on that it became real. And then after a while they had a mobility master plan which included a cycling network and so on, and this is where they are now. Today we know, we visited the Mobile 2020 project, visited Bolzano last autumn, and we had to learn that they still struggle to maintain this consensus. So after so many years it is not easy anymore, but however it is still a good example, I would say. Another example, what I mentioned, was the refinement, good and careful design for cycling infrastructure. Yeah, as I mentioned, the infrastructure lacks very often the last polish, I say. Sometimes we have high curbs, even if they were lowered, but they are still a bit too high that you cannot drive in a comfortable way over it. And so to really look at the details, how is a tunnel designed, how is a bicycle rack designed, and all these little details, this needs for sure good planners, the awareness of the planners, the technical knowledge of transport engineers and of the construction staff. So it means it also needs a quality management. And if I think about cycling in the future, I would say it's self-understanding for these groups, that they know kind of what they have to do, that there is not a discussion about it. I think I will skip that because I don't want to get short in time. So in general, cycling has, we always say, yeah, cycling needs the compact, the dense city, because the range of cycling is not so far than with, for example, car driving. And perhaps it sounds a bit awkward, but I think a high share of cycling in cities can influence in a medium and long term how the functions in the cities are positioned. So we have 30, 40, 50 years of planning behind us where we separated the functions, meaning there is living, there is working, there is leisure and whatever. And so these big scale functions have the result that you have long trips. So for example, if is this also a pointer? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So if, for example, red is living, so I live here and I work here. So probably I take the car because it's very far to go to work. When there is a city or any settlement with a very mixed structure of functions, I can say I live here and I work there. And so it's not so far to go, and there I might consider to take the bike or even walk. So I would say when we have a high share of cyclists, we can influence also the type of urban planning we need, that the structure allows short trips and allows this mixture. So then, go back. Then I think it's also the role of cycling is diminished to leisure traffic or even to sports. And in a future-oriented mobility culture, I think it will be important to overcome this. And there we have not only cycling in general as an everyday means of transport. I think it has to do with a lot with going to work, commuting, and it has to do with transporting things. And this is why I choose this example. So the topic city logistics is it's a phenomenon which is getting really urgent in cities, that you have, especially in the core centers, high amounts of motorized transport just to deliver goods to smaller and bigger shops. And I guess Ton Dachers yesterday certainly cut this topic too, but with thinking about new ways what the cycle and especially cycle logistic can contribute to such city logistic concepts, it's an open question. I think the most transport concepts of the cities do not consider that today in a serious way, and I guess there is a lot of potential in there, especially if you see it in connection also with electrical bikes and for sure cargo bikes. And the dimension of freight transport by bicycle has not only that you reduce the impact of motorized traffic. I think it's also an economic question. So it's for sure, for example, that you will have new services which develop. You have entrepreneurs who take over this potential, and you also use the existing infrastructure, meaning the roads, in a more smooth way, that you don't need to spend so much money to refurbish roads quite that often. I also said something about commuting, so here I see also a big potential for the future, again in connection with electrical bikes, but also in general. It is here again the question of very good smart solutions in detail, that, for example, the connection public transport and bike is going smoothly. So in the moment we can observe in some countries transport associations see the bike as a feeder and as a friend, but it's not that way everywhere. And I think there's a lot to do, not only to talk about tariffs, not only to talk about the issue how bikes can be taken in tram lines or in buses. It's also especially about bicycle parking at public transport nodes. And it is also, again, about integrating information and communication technologies in that to make it more user-friendly. And now I'm almost at the end. So there are some other topics which kind of cut also what role can cycling play in a multi-optional or transport system, or also in a mobility culture of the future. And here I see that the question of transport costs is an important trigger. So we have rising energy costs, and from a political point of view, it is good to think about the citizens. What can the political system to relieve the citizens of high transport costs? So if they understand that it is a political message to promote cycling, they tell the people, if you cycle, you have more money in your pocket, which you can spend for something else. Then it's also about flexibility and spontaneity. So it's a very, the modern society, I think these two words are kind of a synonym for modern societies. Everybody wants to be flexible, has to be flexible, and we don't want to feel guided by timetables, for example, of public transport. So this is overarching lifestyle, and with using the bike, there are many elements which is taking this into account. So you can be flexible, you don't have to look on the clock, I have to leave, my train is leaving. And that is what you have with using the car too. And so it is not so much about the question, do I use the car or do I use the public transport? It is more with which means of transport am I flexible and can fulfill my mobility need. Another point is green technology. So cycling is a green technology, and I think there have not yet been all good solutions and new services which are needed for a cycle system have not yet been invented. So we can expect that there will be a lot more good inventions. We see them every day. We see them here on the conference, and I think it shows also the economic potential of cycling. And now, kind of like a last thing, mobility behavior is not only a rational thing, so we decide not only because of something is very rational, so we also need the way to self-express and to individualize our behavior. And so cycling, as we also have seen, especially today in the morning, is a way where we can express our individuality. And people need to do that in different levels, but I think it's in humans in general. And so the trends we observe of cycling chic and cycling as a trend in many cities is a very typical element that we can say, okay, here something happens which was unique for the car, kind of. With this, it happened the same, but we see now that there is another individual mode of transport which can take over this, and therefore we don't need this single or mono needed transport system where people have a status symbol and that only can be the car, because it's something very natural. So with this, I close for the moment and hope that we can discuss a little bit later.